The Philadelphia Church of God presents the Trumpet Daily.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Trumpet Daily. On Tuesday we posted a program about the post-American world, and in that particular program we talked with the Trumpet's managing editor, Mr. Joel Hilliker, about what life will be like on this planet after the United States pulls away and disappears from the scene. And as I discussed with him, he pointed out that there's quite a few people, even here in America, that are relieved by this, that are quite happy, actually, to see the United States pull back. And I thought it was interesting. The next day after that discussion, I saw this article at the American Thinker titled, "The Iran Deal and the Future of the Middle East." This particular author writes, "We have been involved in the Middle East like an ill-bred house guest who has stayed too long." He says it's time to pack our bags, and Americans should cheer. Americans should cheer about this. We should be happy that we can no longer influence the Middle East like we once did. He said Israel will benefit from America's departure. With America gone, the Israelis and the Gulf Sheikdoms will discover a marriage of convenience against an Iranian threat. He says later, with America out of the picture, the people of the Middle East will be forced to think in creative terms to solve their own problems. These will no longer be our problems. And you can sympathize with that argument, knowing just how difficult it's been for the United States in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and elsewhere. But is this really a good thing to pull out of such a volatile region? Can the United States just carry on and no longer have to deal with any of these problems? No worries? A lot of people think that way. Notice what he goes on and says. Pax Americana is ending. Of course, we talked about that Tuesday, as I said. We no longer need the Middle East, and they no longer need us, except to continue to suck our blood and treasure. Later down, he says, there will be exacerbated chaos and greater impoverishment. Middle East refugees, he says, will flood Europe. The Europeans deserve each and every one of them. Educated and professional classes in Europe will flee to the English-speaking world across the oceans. With some modest modifications in immigration law, the English-speaking world will inherit this talent. He says Europe, with its inability to reproduce itself and its discomfort in standing up for its own culture, is a failing society. He says Europe is dying. It is just that the formal obituary has not yet been written. And so in this conservative thinker's view, Pax Americana is over. This is a good thing. Americans should be cheering. Middle Eastern refugees will flood into Europe. Europe will die. And then the United States will get the best that remains from Europe as they come over here. The brightest will come over to the United States. Now, that's not a very realistic view of the post-American world. It's a view that's not really grounded in history even, to say nothing of prophecy. But isn't it amazing how many people, even in our own land, see this astonishing demise of the United States and reason that this is somehow a good thing? It's somehow a good thing for the United States to be out of the picture as far as the world is concerned. It just shows how many people really do need this next issue of the Trumpet magazine, which we've been talking about this week. What happens next? What happens next in the post-American world? That's what we discuss at length in that issue. I just want to focus, though, on this notion that Europe is dying. You do hear that frequently today. Here in the United States, well, really all over the world. But when you think about what the Bible prophesies in the years ahead, it talks about this final resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire in Daniel and Revelation and in other prophetic books. But in Daniel 2 in particular, it says that this final resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire will be this unstable and volatile mixture of iron and clay. An unstable mixture that comes together for a short space of time. I just want to quote to you from one verse. This is Daniel 2 in verse 43 in the Revised Standard Version. It says, "As you saw the iron mixed with miry clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay." So politically and economically, Europe is, it is a continent, a mixed continent of clay, weak clay, but also iron-like strength. You see both on the continent. You see some nations that are very strong and robust, and you see others, obviously, that are weak and fragile. And yet what the Bible prophesies is that this unsteady mixture is going to come together for a short space of time and wreak havoc on this earth, all over the earth. It's happened historically, and it's going to happen one last time. Let me just give a quote to you from Herbert W. Armstrong. This is something he wrote back in 1956. This is over a half century ago, talking about the Roman Empire, the final resurrection. He says, "It will possess greater military might by far than the Rome of old, but it will also inherit fatal weaknesses." He says, "Prophecy symbolizes this admixture of never-equaled military might and unprecedented weakness with the apt phrase, iron mixed with miry clay," as we just read there. He says, "The European nations will unite militarily." Now think about this. He's writing this in 1956, back when Europe, and Germany for that matter, were divided. He says in 1956, "The European nations will unite militarily, but they are suspicious and envious of each other. They hate one another." So there's a lot of distrust. There's suspicion. As I say, it'll be a short-lived empire. But God prophesies that during that brief existence, that there will be iron-like strength. And as Mr. Armstrong said in that quote, it's actually going to possess greater military might than the Rome of old. Now, in looking at Europe today, if you look through the turmoil, the economic instability, where is it in Europe today that you see real strength? Where do you see real power in Europe? Well, the answer to that should be obvious. It certainly is if you've followed thetrumpet.com for very long. This is from the GermanForeignPolicy.com website, a report that came out on November 5th, about a month ago. It says, "A major redistribution of power is currently taking place in Europe, with France and Great Britain falling clearly behind Germany, according to a recent declaration of the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, also known as the SWP. It says, "In Southern Europe, there are already massive protests against the German government's dictates. The SWP's suggestions support various initiatives from within Berlin's establishment aimed at consolidating German domination over the EU and pushing the next German government toward a more offensive global policy." So Germany's actually using this financial crisis to impose its will on the continent. We've written about this a number of times at our website. Now this article goes on to say how that Germany's clout is growing across the continent. It says Germany's European rivals are losing ground. So it compares Germany then to France and then later Britain. It says France and the southern countries are being affected by the debt crisis to a growing extent and are thereby losing influence. And then it goes and talks about London. Even London is losing its clout across the continent, which is only helping Germany to gain a more prominent role right there in the center of Europe. This report says that those protesting, particularly down in the south, are protesting, saying that the power shift is because the Germans are using the economic means that they have available at their disposal to achieve what they were militarily unable to do in the world wars, obviously. That's quite a statement that the GermanForeignPolicy.com brings out. It says France's economic fragility and its incapacity for reform have left it on the back foot. Italy has to go cap in hand to Frankfurt for assistance. Rome now exercises less influence than ever in setting Europe's agenda, with Britain outside the Eurozone, and the probability increasing that it will exit the EU altogether. Its voice in Brussels has never been listened to less on matters of continental importance. So it talks about the inevitable departure of Britain, which of course we've told you about for decades. And once Britain leaves, I mean, that's only going to strengthen Germany's grip on Europe. One final quote, it says, still unresolved is the question of how a global, politically strengthened Germany should position itself in relationship to the USA. The SWP declaration only states that the United States is relinquishing its stabilizer and mediator role in Europe. What a statement. I mean, it says that it's going to go and concentrate on Asia. At least that's what the Obama administration has been saying. But really, as this issue of the trumpet points out, we're relinquishing our role all over the world, in the Middle East, in Europe, in Asia. It's happening everywhere. Now, as that happens, do you think they're just going to go to sleep in Germany? Do you think Europe is just going to drift off into a deep sleep? As the United States relinquishes its role as the lone superpower in this world, a German-led European Union will rush to fill the power void. That will happen. Now, as I said, it's going to be an unstable mixture of iron and clay. The Bible says that it will be. Now, you can look at Greece, you can look at Portugal or Spain, some of those nations, and see, well, yes, there's definitely some clay there in the mixture. But Germany is not Greece. Germany is not Greece. Germany is far and away the most powerful nation in Europe. Germany's conquering Europe without really firing any shots. And as we know from Bible prophecy, soon, for a short-lived period of a few years, Germany will lead a European superpower to dominate not just the continent, but the world.
Throughout history, Europe is a part of the world that has repeatedly seen astonishing violence and destruction. The 100 years before World War I are considered one of Europe's greatest ever periods of peace. Yet during that century, France invaded Spain, Russia fought Turkey, various German states fought with Denmark, Austria, and France. Britain and Turkey fought Russia, and Greece fought Turkey. Beyond that were many internal conflicts, uprisings, declarations of independence, and other political unrest. However, after World War II, the continent experienced real peace. During the Cold War, European nations took a backseat to two superpowers, America and the Soviet Union. The United States told Western Europe that it didn't need to maintain a world-class army, but could count on protection from the US. This deal helped bring unusual stability to the European continent. Now, however, this unusual era is coming to an end. As we head into the post-American era, it is Europe that is picking up the mantle of leader of the free world. In recent months, it has begun to get serious about sorting out its own military. In May, an official EU agency that analyzes defense and security issues published a landmark report concerning how Europe should defend itself now that it can no longer count on America's protection. In October, the EU's Foreign Minister Catherine Ashton said America's retreat means that Europe must assume greater responsibility for its own security and that of its neighborhood. The continent is perhaps even better positioned to take over economic leadership. As the US dollar weakens, nations are looking for a new global reserve currency. Europe invented its single currency with exactly that goal in mind. The economies of Northern Europe, especially Germany, are fundamentally strong. The Bundesbank has a long-standing reputation as a trustworthy and responsible central bank and could take the Federal Reserve's spot as a world central bank. At present, the only obstacle is the European Union's need for closer political union. Once the Europeans overcome that hurdle, the reserve currency privilege is theirs for the taking. Already, the EU has a larger gross domestic product than the US. The EU's combined GDP is twice that of China, and bigger than China's, Russia's, and Japan's combined. All this puts Europe at the center of the post-American global financial system. Europe is poised politically, militarily, and economically to become the world's next superpower. In addition, the world has come to trust Europe. The Europeans are reputed to be great consensus builders, a continent full of democracies that have not had to use major military power for 70 years. This perception works to the Europeans' advantage. But this charitable view ignores two important points that are cause for legitimate concern about what a world dominated by Europe will look like. The first of these is history. Though Europe has been peaceful in the American-dominated world of the second half of the 20th century, its past shows that this is an extreme exception. With America out of the way, all the factors that have kept Europe at peace will be gone. And for the first time in 70 years, Europe will be free to conduct itself as a major military power. The second major reason we should be concerned about the rise of Europe comes from Bible prophecy. It clearly warns about Europe's military and economic power, exactly the two areas where we see Europe preparing to succeed the US. Daniel 2 and 7 describe a succession of world-ruling empires. The final empire is plainly the Roman Empire. These prophecies state that this empire will remain on the scene in one form or another until the second coming of Jesus Christ. The fulfillment of this prophecy is confirmed by history. European powers have consistently resurrected that resilient Roman Empire. The final resurrection of this empire, in the form of a United States of Europe, will immediately precede the catastrophic events Jesus Christ discussed in Matthew 24, directly leading to His second coming. These prophecies are thoroughly explained in our free booklet, Germany and the Holy Roman Empire. For a copy of your very own, visit thetrumpet.com.
Last week in our program about Germany's comeback kid, we talked about Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg's possible return to the German political scene there in Germany. Today there was an article by Reuters about Gutenberg and his activities and his possible return to politics, and upon reading it, it was almost as if I was reading The Trumpet there, at least for parts of it. It says in Reuters, a private meeting between the two, speaking of Gutenberg and Merkel, a private meeting between the two in the Chancellery earlier this month has fed talk of a comeback. So we told you about this meeting a few weeks ago on the website, and then last week on the Trumpet Daily. Reuters says Gutenberg's youthful charisma and readiness to speak out on controversial issues made him the darling of a German media, fed up with Merkel's colorless caution. It says Germany had never seen a politician like him, never seen a politician like this man. A descendant of Leopold II, Holy Roman Emperor of the late 18th century, so he comes from quite a distinguished pedigree, and his wife does too, as the article points out. She's the great-great-granddaughter of the first German Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck. The article says, until recently, speaking of Gutenberg, he had kept a relatively low profile in Germany, returning home rather frequently, but very silently, according to an interview they had with him. It says, that changed earlier this month with the one-hour secret meeting with Merkel. It has secret in quotes, as we brought out to you. They didn't really work hard to keep it a secret. The secret meeting with Merkel in the Chancellery, which leaked to the media. What the two discussed remains a mystery, but the encounter was seen by some as a test of the political mood for a Gutenberg comeback. So this is something that Brad McDonald wrote about at the Trumpet site November the 8th, that they were testing the waters here and seeing what sort of reaction it would cause there in Germany. A year ago, CSU leader Horst Seehofer promised to bring him back to Germany after the September 2013 federal election that we just passed a couple of months ago. It says the natural place for him to relaunch his career would be Bavaria, where his family traces its roots back to the 12th century and still lives in a castle it has owned since 1482. So this is obviously a story that we'll keep you updated on as we see the way that it twists and turns in the months ahead. Now, speaking of Mr. Gutenberg, he also had another op-ed piece in the New York Times just this past week, November the 26th, I think it was, on Tuesday. And he wrote this article in response to the heavy criticism that Germany is receiving because of its huge trade surplus, all the money that it's making by its exports, and then of course they're not importing many things at all. And so a lot of people, including the United States, have come out and criticized Germany. We talked about this on our site last week, November 20th. But going to this op-ed by Zu Gutenberg, he says, and hearing these accusations, or this criticism that's coming on Germany, he says, hearing these accusations from the United States, which has been putting inflationary pressure on the world economy for decades and just narrowly avoided a default on its debt, is rather ironic. In other words, he's saying, who is America to criticize Germany about how it's negatively impacting the global economy? It's a pretty good point to make, I think. But notice what he goes on and says here. This is also in his op-ed. He writes, a number of usual suspects, ranging from esteemed economists to popular commentators, were quick to join the chorus of criticism led by the United States. He says, reading their articles, one gets the impression that the introduction of the euro was a grand German scheme to take advantage of its weaker neighbors. Now, isn't that interesting that he would bring this up? He acknowledges there that there are commentators who are out there beginning to wonder if Germany's been working behind the scenes, using this crisis, using the financial crisis to gain more power, to impose its will on the other states in the European Union. Now, this is something that we've talked about a lot at thetrumpet.com. I want to take you back to an article from December of 2008. This was 5 years ago. 5 years ago, when Greece really was in the news with its crisis. Of course, the United States was having its own significant struggles at the time as well. But this is from an article by Richard Palmer. He writes, when the current European Economic Union was formalized, so he goes through and gives us a bit of history here, but notice this, it's important history. He says when the Union was formalized, it became inevitable that countries like Greece would eventually face economic challenges. Through the inclusion of Germany, the Economic Union allowed for European-wide interest rates that were much lower in countries like Greece than would normally have been possible. He says, low interest rates encouraged massive borrowing and artificially stimulated a boom. But as with all bubbles, eventually it popped. What Greece and other countries in Southern Europe in particular is dealing with now is the aftermath. So the bubble popped, and then who came along to rescue them, and with a heavy cost tagged on. It says, in addition, Germany entered the euro with an overvalued exchange rate. He's quoting from Bernard Connolly, his book from several years ago. It then faced a long period of high unemployment that drove wages down and restored its competitive position. Mr. Palmer goes on to write, the United States is currently trying to solve its debt-related problems by lowering its interest rates and making borrowing easier. This is treating the symptom. It may reduce the pain, he writes, temporarily, but won't fix anything in the long term. Nations like Greece, though, do not have this option. They can't change the interest rate to a level that suits them. They are stuck with whatever the ECB decides. And the ECB, the European Central Bank that is most heavily influenced by Germany. And so it's Germany that not only arranges for the bailout package, but imposes its will on these other member states that are too weak, really, to stand up to the real strongman of Europe. It says it's not just Greece that's caught in this trap. Spain's economy, too, has gone through a similar process to what Connolly described. And now the International Monetary Fund is predicting that its unemployment will reach 15%. It talks about Ireland and Denmark having troubles as well. And then Mr. Palmer concludes saying, does this mean that it's over for a single European currency? Does this mean it's over? Does this mean Europe's dead? He says, not at all. As both the Trumpet and men like Connolly have been warning, Berlin has been planning for this crisis before it even adopted the euro. It's been planning for this crisis, and taking advantage of it. It says European elites knew it would eventually come, and they will soon present a solution. So that's what's happening. It's the German solution. And as was brought out in that GermanForeignPolicy.com article, they're basically conquering Europe through these economic policies and bailout packages in ways that they couldn't accomplish back in World War II. Mr. Palmer concludes, however it happens, Germany is prophesied to come out on top in this financial crisis. Social unrest and riots will eventually force Europeans to succumb to a strong, united government of Europe, led ultimately not from Brussels, but from Berlin. So really, when you see these social riots and the crisis intensifying in Europe, that's only going to play into Germany's favor, as he brought out in that article from 5 years ago. And now we see it. I mean, it's making headlines. Germany's receiving all this criticism because of a huge trade imbalance that really favors Germany. And Europe sees it, the United States sees it. Well, there's lots of other things that have been happening this week, even though it's been a holiday week here in the United States. But we don't have time to get through everything. Next week, though, we're going to try to follow up on a few other stories that we've had our eye on this past week. Pope Francis had some interesting comments about capitalism, and I think indirectly took a shot at the United States earlier this week. So we'd like to look into that a little bit further, and also we've prepared I think a 4 or 5 minute feature about him and just what he's been doing since he became Pope earlier this year. I also thought I'd just refer you to Charles Krauthammer's column from today on the outbreak of lawlessness, as he called it. And I mean, this is right in the same theme that we were talking about a couple of weeks ago with that program on the spirit of lawlessness in Washington. He talked about the recent change there in the Senate on removing the filibuster rules and that sort of thing, and he ties in quite a few things there too with what's happening in the White House. So plenty more to get into as we look ahead to next week. In the meantime, just to remind you, the Philadelphia Trumpet, this is the January 2014 edition. What happens next? What happens in the post-American world? And also, don't forget about the Trumpet Weekly. It comes out every week on Friday, comes out today, later today. If you're not already a subscriber, go to thetrumpet.com and become a subscriber to that weekly news digest that really does give you a proper understanding of what's happening in your world as the light of Bible prophecy is shed upon all these events that we see transpiring. So we thank you for joining us today, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next week.